And we're on. Dave, thanks so much for jumping on.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Phil. Thank you very much.
So I'm Phil. I'm a partner at Webisoft. We build custom software and we're interested in all sorts of industries. The one we're talking about today is mostly oil and gas, but we might go into energy and to broader subjects. Dave, do you want to take a couple minutes just to introduce yourself, where you are in your career and what you currently do?
Sure. Right now, I would say I'm semi-retired in a 25-year-old startup, as I explained yesterday, and maybe just tell a little bit about that a bit later on and its relevance to oil and gas. I have spent 40 years of my existence prior to my retirement in the energy sector. I do say the word energy because depending on the organization you were in, it wasn't always focused on just oil and gas. We were doing a lot of alternative energies and other approaches. So it's better to think of it as energy in that context. Uh, my background is scientific, actually, a master's in physchem and ultraviolet spectroscopy. And the 40 years were really in the IT and what is now digital sector of it. The interesting thing that when I first started my career, it was only scientists, engineers, and mathematicians that were hired to do programming because the majority of the view of the computer science education at the time was that it was about the computers and not about the applications. So the kinds of applications we were building were based on things like differential equations and simulations and things. So they felt that it really was the scientific community that would understand I'm getting a good answer out of the programming than focus as much on the programming. So that was the start of my career. And to my sheer delight, uh, it ended up being a fantastic world to live in because in the energy sector or in the company I worked with or worked with over the years, in an oil and gas company or something, you get every type of digital approach required. You get everything from major databases and transaction systems to the highly scientific world of geophysics and seismic processing and all that stuff. And in my case, for 30 years, I didn't have to leave the same company. I just worked with it entirely. So a tremendous breadth of experience and wealth of knowledge is brought to bear on it. Now, how much of that I retained is always a challenge, but it was never a dull moment, shall we say. So I think that's probably enough of me for now.
And so did you try to retire and then was kind of looking for things to do and that's how you got dragged into another venture? Is that it?
I wouldn't say I got dragged kicking and screaming. What I would say is that for 6 months of retirement, I did what everybody had recommended you do, which is just totally relax and totally disengage from work. And I found after 6 months, being an academic, I love to learn new things. I love to do things that I couldn't stand not getting involved in something that would continue my education and continue to build upon anything I built before. So I had been working with, while I was still in the energy sector, with another company that had a novel technology about capturing uh, spatial information, geometry immediately at each and every pixel on a sensor. And it was fantastic. And by that time, we had managed to get the sensor into silica. So it opened up a whole new commercial avenue because the price point was dramatically dropped for the cost of the sensor. So I got involved now in the development of the commercial aspect of the software. We're building a stack and things are really going well. So it's keeping my gray cells going and it's keeping me involved in a lot of the, say, we say 3D world, which was one of my areas of strong interest when I was still in the energy sector.
So in your current role, which I understand is CTO,
Yeah, that is correct.
what takes up most of your day?
Most of it is actually design and architecture and working with the young developers and trying to get them. So I had a very fortunate career in the sense that when I started, the companies I worked for were absolutely adamant about educating us. And so we were put through a lot of courses that started with technologies and approaches like business planning or business analysis and that, which to me was probably the most critical part of my education. So, a lot of people can program. There's a lot about good architecture and good structure. But what I still think is lacking in today's world, for the sake of the speed of programming, is something called business analysis. And what that is really understanding and gaining an understanding of what's the real problem that's being attempted to be solved here. Too often, individuals, your customer or your client, describes the problem space in terms of their existing solution space and modifications to it.
Mm.
Add me another pull down menu that can do this, and that's all I want. And that actually is usually furthest from the truth of what's the real problem they're trying to solve. And so there's a lot more complexity built into it. So in my early training, it was all about really breaking down and understanding what's the true real problem that needs to be addressed. What's the best way of adding capability to address that problem? Like, if you could do this, wouldn't this be wonderful?
Mm-hmm.
And then work backwards from there and saying, okay, here's how we can codify that. So that's when you do your design, your architecture, and your codification. So to me, programming was always at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day. And too many people just jump into coding and they build, shall we say, less than efficient code, and often very challenging to both maintain and not only maintain the code, but then to understand. So maintenance programs come in, they don't know. Often these people, a few years later, come back to the same code. They can't figure out what they did. So there's a
Uh-huh.
lot in there about, about the design architecture. So the majority of my time is actually trying to impart as much of that knowledge and information to these young developers. So I think of my role more as mentoring than it is anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some sharp, dumb kids out there. I really enjoy working with the young minds. They challenge me.
Do they show you around multiple AI models that are available, or?
Yeah, I just want, okay, it's actually, I don't have trouble with a lot of these concepts. In my earlier career, part of my role in the last 15 years was actually about what are the new emerging technologies that come out?
Mm-hmm.
What is the convergence of some of these technologies together, which was the most interesting point. In other words, how would AI, for example, get involved with standard data capture techniques, and how could it be used with quantum, and how could we do that for image analysis or other kinds of things? So each one of those things, when you say if there's a convergence at those loci, from there, what does that mean? So my job was to actually look into the future, see what was converging, what was coming together, and say, does this pose a threat or an opportunity for our organization? And so I was, gosh, about 15 years ago, looking at AI and looking at robotic approaches and flying drones and doing robotic data capture and doing image analysis and doing signal processing. All those things were in there, and it's in each of those lenses into the solution. So not one of them is a single answer. It's just simply a lens to look into how can I get a good answer. So going back to what I meant by the business analysis problem, right?
Mm-hmm. So basically, you're probing for more planning, less execution. So like,
I wouldn't say planning as much. Planning is when you're quite comfortable, the trajectory and the stuff. I think this was early days of exploration and understanding. We should be able to do this if we put these three technologies together. We should be able to get the solution we're looking for. So at that point, I say it's less of planning than it is more investigation to say,
mm,
when will it be ready and mature enough for us to actually build a viable product, or get some organization to build a viable product that we could then use at scale, right? So it's a bit of that precursor stuff that I was heavily involved
mm,
in, right? Well, I was saying, seeing the current state of AI, I think it's plateaued. I think it's done a remarkable job, but the products we're seeing out in the world and that are, kind of what I expect to be kind of the first generation approaches, and they become mainstream, which is great. The challenge in what I've seen over my career about mainstream is, for a while there, everybody thinks they're the panacea and they're the answer to everything, and they're just a part of the answer. They're
mm-hmm.
not. mortality. And they're already, we're already starting to see some limits being reached with the current AI approaches and the neural nets that are out there. Not to say there's anything wrong with doing that. It's to say that's fantastic. They're kind of there, but what's the next thing that's going to either improve upon that or is going to displace it or disintermediate?
Hmm. So on that note, where do you see real innovation coming in the next couple of years?
I've been monitoring. Well, I think there's more in the AI. I have a model of what I believe is fourth generational AI. Most AI today is using primarily scalar values. So my interest in the 3D world is we should be ingesting vector properties. We should be
Hmm.
ingesting 3D data. We should be using algorithms behind the scenes that aren't working with scalar. And even though people say, oh, yeah, I can do vector, it's really three channels, right? They're still saying there's an X and a Y and a Z or whatever coordinate system using. There's three channels to describe it. What we really need is the math that can do, geometrical analysis, topographical analysis, and that, because that's what the 3D world is. It's about surfaces and shapes and angles and geometry, and that's the way we perceive it. That's the way we should be interpreting it. So I think there's a whole new generation of AI. I know there is some research being done in those areas, so I'm not to say I've created something brand new. I'm saying these things are existing, but they're still not yet in the commercial marketplace. So I think there's roles in there. I've been really enthused about some of the real breakthroughs that have come in quantum. There's
Hmm.
been a roadmap of how does one get to a real true quantum computer, more like the Newman ones, as opposed to, D-Wave and things which came out in the past, which are fantastic, but they aren't. They're more like, let me put a system into a state and let me watch it decay and see the
Hmm.
answer. It usually finds the smallest path. So those type of computing approaches fantastic for a certain class of problems, but they're not the more the general computing. I also believe there's a lot based on entanglement that can be done with quantum sensors. So there's going to be a whole dramatic upsurge in the capability of doing sensing if you can use and build sensors based on entanglement. Think of it. I don't have to put myself into that location to try and collect information. I'll put the sensor out there that's entangled, and I can watch the entangled twin of the sensor, if I can use that language, being really, really simplistic. I can look at it in the lab, or I can look at it in the office and see what's really happening at, a mile below the ocean floor, or in my reservoirs down below, or any of these things, simply because I've got some entangled capability of sensing down there. So those are some areas I think are really powerful right now. Um, and that's kind of off the top of my head were areas that I'm still interested in monitoring.
Hmm. Okay, so that's quite advanced stuff you're talking about.
Yes, but it is emergent. It is, and you're bringing up a good point that I always am careful about as well, and I call it the half life of technology.
Right.
There is the half life. So when you think of the value now to a company like an oil and gas company or any organization, you want to think of what's the longevity of the solution, and so what's the half
Mm.
life that we
Hmm.
say I invest in it, I rebuild my entire infrastructure around this, and I say, is it a 10-year payout? Is it a 5-year payout? Before I say I really should consider now upgrading it in some way or totally reinvesting in a whole new approach.
Yeah.
Uh, the latter, a whole new approach, is usually a much longer wavelength. You probably want to sit with a 10-year cycle minimum so you can harvest recoup your original capital investment and that kind of stuff, uh, and then get good value. Sometimes you're forced into an upgrade because support is gone. So even if you stay in the traditional technology, at some point in life, you're going to have a forced upgrade.
Hmm.
Been watching the stuff about Windows 10 dead. Okay, well, there you go.
Yeah.
So, uh,
Not always for the better.
yeah, yeah.
Not always for the better. Is there so you mentioned like a 5 year, sometimes 10 year return on investment. Um, is that a hard sell to your clients, specifically in oil and gas, which I understand is an industry that's kind of hard to impress, if you will, on return on investment?
Yeah, there's a huge capital investment in oil and gas.
Mm-hmm.
Huge. I mean, when we talk about new platforms out in deep water or something, you're probably talking about a $2.5 billion investment just to build the structure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, you probably spent another $2.5 billion right from early views of exploration, exploitation, drilling, and proving out that there is a reservoir of enough capability in it for it to last 10, 15, 20 years so that you say, I can get production out of it, I can move forward. So when you look at that whole capital investment kind of thing, you have to say, how long is, what's the cost of changing any approach in there? And I think it breaks into two categories, and then I'll talk about techniques I've used in the past to help get over the resistance to change. And break it. I like to break the world into two simplistic terms. One is Greenfield, one is Brownfield.
Yep.
I don't know if that term. So Greenfield is when we're building a new platform, when we're building a new platform in your facility, it was a lot easier to say, this is the infrastructure one should put in now. We've got Wi-Fi that's eye safe. We can put it in there. You know, those kinds of things can be put into these places, and here's the cost, and they're reasonable. Once you put it into there, though, and you built the structure, that's where the secondary challenge comes in. What's it take to upgrade it? Be no different than saying, if I had copper tubing in my house and I wanted to change it to something else, what's it cost me? Or if I have to rerun my electrical, what's it cost me? So those kinds of things are.
Or do I need to buy a new house?
It may be easier to go Greenfield and get what you want and get you upgrades that way than it is Brownfield. So the energy sector breaks, and I think any of the industrial utilities break into this problem. Greenfield versus Brownfield. Far less Greenfield, hell of a lot more Brownfield.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly where you're saying we're just trying to stay alive. So the challenges in there bringing new technology and are all related to what's the operating costs.
Is there a downtime? Yeah.
What's our downtime? So refinery turnovers or any major structure turnovers, revamping and all that stuff. So let's go back to resistance to change. And I think it's important to say change isn't the issue. It's why change, which is more the problem to be solved. And a lot of it, I always broke it down into, again, three simplistic ways of looking at it. What's in it for the coalface resource? What's in it for middle management? And what's in it for upper management? Because each one of them look at the world through different lenses, okay? And the coalface is about, this is my job. What's it doing to my job? Are you replacing me? Are you displacing me? Are you making my job easier? Are you taking my job away? Right? All these kinds of issues. So I always said, take an approach where I love to work with the coalface. I like to go with the people in the field. I like to understand their problems. Say, how do you look at what you're doing at this point in time, and how is this going to help you as opposed to hinder you? And you find by educating them and getting them to see the world in a different way, right, that you can often change their minds. So I have a philosophy: I can't change your opinion. I can only change the environment under which you form that opinion. So by getting them to see a different world and different possibilities, and going back to showing them like proof of concepts, or what if we could do it this way, you really get them engaged. In there, the other lens, I think, is, okay, so then you've got middle management. What's their biggest value issue? They're supposed to keep the goddamn operating budget. Pardon my French. They're supposed to keep their operating budget alive.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have investment capital. They don't have that issue in there. And you say, how the heck am I going to pay for this? And I'm supposed to deliver these metrics, and you're going to disturb my guys putting in this stuff. And so there's another education layer where you've got to target them in a different way to, again, get them to see the value, right? And say, here's what's in it for you, right? And here's where you're going to go. And And then the last level is the strategic level, which is usually at the corporate level. And they're the ones who are thinking more long term and,
Yeah.
some of these things. So again, an education around the world and with peers. So we used to do things called blue chalks where I'd, get a 2-day, 2.5-day immersive workshop with, say, the top 40 people in our company, with anywhere up to 10 outside equivalent people from other companies who are considered major leaders in some area of stuff, and get at this immersive conversation to say, why did they do it? What do we do? So it's a story tell, lesson learn kind of approach, which worked really well. So those techniques in that 3-level pincer usually got people over the hump of making change. The other slight lens I would put on there is that each one of them, you needed to find what I call who are the key stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And by stakeholder, I meant even at the coalface, for example, there's always one or two people in a refinery or in a production platform or in a field or something. Everybody listens to them
Yeah, they're going to push your ideas essentially.
and follow them. So if you get them engaged in the process of understanding the potential in your world, then you do that. And you can do that at all layers. Interestingly enough, if you're in a regulated industry, again, like all of the industrial energy is, you've got to now look at who are your external stakeholders and what's in it for them. So what is often missing in terms of that engagement philosophy, in my mind, is who are the regulatory people?
Yep.
And how do you engage them? Because they're used to providing regulations, codification of safety and other protocols, data protocols and all that. And they're engaged in a career that is based on a certain knowledge of the technology used. Now you're telling them, now you've got to learn a new technology.
Yep.
And some of those old metrics may totally be wrong for the new technology. So again, you've got to engage them in a different way.
We have a situation like that at the moment that
Yeah.
one of our clients where the regulators had never seen a cloud software before, like a software for online before, right? They were used to on-premise, like desktop versions installed on one computer. Okay, we could test it there. If it's something that's constantly evolving and, obviously opens a whole new can of worms that they're not used to, and they didn't really know how to handle it. So it's still pending. It's still in review. Yeah.
And it was a simple thing. There was, code requirements of controls and saying, well, where's your data stored?
Yeah.
Show me where it's stored. Show me your backup for it.
Show me the room. Yeah.
Show me the room. Show me the servers. And it's like, well, this is a cloud approach. That doesn't exist. And so getting them to understand you can't show them that way.
Yeah.
You have to have a different way of understanding data privacy and those kinds of things. We were getting that in a lot of the international data and issues are moving that around.
Yep.
So you're absolutely right. It's a great example of another type of issue with the regulatory. One more client stakeholders that not every industry gets, but we do in the energy sector, and that is actually the surface and mineral rights landowners. If they're not the government and they're not energy companies and they're onshore, then you run into your how do I get to my well site? And that's where surface lands. And then from 2 feet below projected to the center of the earth, who owns the middle rights? Is it the government or is it the farmer or, whatever? And so those are kinds of things. As another example of the challenge of that, as we started to bring in using some drones for some of the inspections, like to move there, you had to ask the question of what's my flight path? I've got FAA regulations of how far I can run the drone and everything, but what you've got now is ability to say, let's do as the crow flies. Well, wait a minute. You're flying over someone else's land. On the surface rights, you always said, well, I got to go through a road or I got to build a road on this farmer's field. And so you had your surface rights, but it was a very restricted corridor of a road. If I could fly over Farmer B's farm to get to my well site directly from where I've started versus having to follow the road, what does that mean? Do I have the right to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And we were actually having some interesting pushbacks related to the noise of the drones
Mm-hmm.
and, things like that. And then it also came into the privacy of, which way is the camera pointing
Yep.
and you're flying over. And so it came into the fact that there's no such thing right now in your property rights. You have to say, well, how high does my property really go? All of a sudden the Z axis was introduced into property rights and privacy rights in a way that didn't exist before the drone technology came in the same way. I mean, yeah, there were satellites and everything, but no one no one took it as real as there's a damn drone.
Yeah, it wasn't as intrusive, right? It's a little drones don't fly that high. Yeah.
Yeah. So um, that's kind of the umbrella I always looked at to say, as we're bringing in change, these are the people you need to convince that this change is actually good for us and get them all in there. So that to me was always a challenge of what we called adoption at scale.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel it's harder to bring change to this particular industry?
It, yes, it was. I'm honestly not sure if it's going to be as hard again, because in a way, um, the industry is sort of in Greenfield again.
Mm-hmm.
While I was in the industry, as I was getting closer in age to retirement, we called it the Great Shift Change. And what that meant is we weren't finding a lot of young people wanting to come into oil and
Mm-hmm.
gas. It was a bad word, and we weren't getting the people coming out of universities, both either taking the courses or even adjacent courses to say we
Yeah.
can train you.
Negative connotation around the industry a little
So
bit.
we're getting this aging workforce who were, totally resistant to changes. Like, I just want to retire stuff. So we had this, and I think we're in the midst of probably, I don't know if I would say we're halfway through or something, but the great shift change has sort of occurred. We've got a lot of retirement people. So two things have happened about that. One, we lost a lot of intellectual property in the sector. IP and institutional knowledge is just gone. People are retired, and
Okay, and it's just once they're gone, they're gone. They bring it.
once they're gone, they're gone. And there have been attempts to do social approaches and social media approaches and that to get that knowledge back or something. But what it may mean is that we're starting to see a bit of a resurgence in the people who are being hired. So kind of there's all the young kids coming in again. But your challenge is now they're kind of probably relearning lessons we learned decades ago because
Right.
we haven't changed the infrastructure.
Yeah, and that history is maybe lost a little bit because of all the departures. Yeah.
I have hope that this new generation is full of openness to change, far more than the guys who said, "I don't want to change. I just want to finish my job out so I can retire."
Right.
Right. So I think there's
Is that why they brought you back? They needed some of that knowledge back.
yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if they could afford me or if I'd really, I don't really want to do that. I said, I want to enjoy my
Yeah.
retirement career in the way of, as I said, being more of a mentor in that rather than back into the.
Well, you get to when you retire, like, so everybody that I know that has retired, I don't think any of them just sit at home doing nothing, right? Everybody's like tries to do that for a couple of weeks and then they realize I kind of need a new project.
Yeah.
But the difference is you kind of set your own terms, right?
Correct.
It's gotta be this way, and like some of them even make more money than they did in their career because they don't really care if it's a no, right? Listen, that's what it's gonna take,
Yeah.
and they're having a lot of fun. Like sometimes it's part time, it's a consulting type gig advisory, and they just get to work on cool stuff. So retirement sounds fun. That sounds from what I
It
hear.
is. It's when when you're able to remove the majority of your financial burden,
Yeah,
you can reap the rewards of that. So you say, yeah, I don't have to work that hard, or no, I don't need to take that consulting.
work smarter.
I can work smarter or something. Yeah, I do have other passions besides learning. So, this
Hmm.
this occupies a good portion of my day, but not the entirety of my day anymore. So this is all. a good balance for me. Good balance.
Nice. Very, very, very nice to hear that. Where do you see the most waste in oil and gas in the industry as a whole?
Boy, I'm probably going to get lambasted for saying this. Too much political influence.
Okay.
Too many policies that are brought in based on short-term views of the world.
Mm.
Okay, so I know in the organization I work for, we always looked at the 50 plus year outlook for oil and gas supply and demand, and we always talked about transition. And so there was nothing that was in our organization that was saying, we aren't concerned about climate change or
Mm-hmm.
what is the potential impact of this stuff. But we said, as you move down the hydrocarbon chain, we see transition approaches to adhere to these policies, right? But too many of them became so political, the policies were put in with ludicrous metrics
Mm.
that made no sense. And, we've sort of seen that a quick shift in the political view of oil again, and all of a sudden EVs have died, right? Or I shouldn't say have died, but they've
But no,
really
but
declined.
I see what you
You're
mean.
no
Yeah.
incentivized. They're
Yeah.
de-incentivized. So the numbers of the sales are way down.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look and kind of where I was at, the hybrids is a good transition approach.
Yep.
You
I
got the
think
best,
hybrids are doing
got a
well in
bit of
general,
both.
no?
You got a bit of both. You keep people happy with range,
Yep.
right? And you keep people happy
It's a
with
good compromise.
the compromise. So it's a good compromise to say, well, 10 years of hybrid vehicles would not be a bad thing.
That
Eventually,
wouldn't be, yeah.
how can we change the energy equation of the electric grid? Because the electric grid is, uses far more hydrocarbon than I think people ever realized. So it was a dichotomy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saving hydrocarbon here. Are you really? Because we got to
Yeah.
produce electricity later. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
need more hydrocarbon we're consuming.
Plus
That's
all
kind
the
of the
lithium
but
harvesting and the production of
absolutely.
the EV, it's not necessarily a good thing at scale.
It doesn't mean you don't go down the path. It just says take a concerted view of how long it's going to take to dramatic. So think about we talked about changing the infrastructure of a single company.
Yeah.
We're trying to change the infrastructure of the world, right?
Are you referring to when they kind of push to like, everybody's got to be selling electric vehicle only in like 2030 or something like that? And they kind of
Yeah. Well,
arbitrarily
and then
set,
bringing
yeah.
those up, even bringing those numbers up.
Yeah, yeah. Now every year, right? They change it. They're like, oh yeah, maybe not. So that's a knee-jerk reaction for sure.
What it does do is it creates instability
Yeah.
in its supply and demand. You got to let the supply and demand balance out the cost.
Mm-hmm.
And this creates undue instability. So probably the worst thing that can happen in energy, and what people maybe not realize, is how unstable the energy sector is from about the mid 70s or early 70s when they deregulated everything.
Mm.
Once you went into deregulation and you're on the price,
Yeah.
then let yourself float on a global market, people didn't realize how unstable the environment is. So going back to our risk of investment, if it takes us $10 billion to get an investment to get a high, to finally go on good production on a big field, and then meanwhile, and so you predict that at an oil price of $50 a barrel, and the next thing you know, for the next year and a half, oil prices at $10 a barrel,
Yeah.
you're in deep trouble. So, and that certainly has happened over the decades that I've been in there, that
Yep.
constant shifting of dramatic price swings. So every time they kind of balance to a number for quite a while, it's really healthy. So I
Mm-hmm.
said this influence about changing that balance is not healthy. So maybe short for that, but
Well, we can
that's
cut it
one thing I
out. We
think
can edit it.
is out. Well, that's okay.
I know we're coming up on time, so my last question, is there anything that keeps you up at night about, what's on the horizon or changes coming in the next couple of years?
So putting the politics aside, it's not so much that it keeps me up at night as there are two things going on that excite the heck of me. One is JWST, which is the the infrared, the space telescope at the Lagrange point.
Mm.
What we're finding about the universe, because we are uncovering a tremendous amount of new knowledge in the realm of physics, deep physics, and quantum, and all those things that are suggesting a whole new set of what will ultimately be technological approaches and deep understanding. And so that excites the heck out of me, because it just says we're going to see a whole bunch of new things. And the other thing I think was really tremendous, and we're in the throes of, but we've got to make sure the politics stay out of it, is low Earth orbit being commercialized. So
Mm.
I think we're going to see a whole bunch of incredible, like, manufacturing and things being produced for us to consume on the Earth based on manufacturing in low Earth orbit at commercial scale. Because what you can do in low Earth orbit, where you've got a natural vacuum and you've got microgravity, so the precision one can make in materials, biochemicals, biological systems, and standard things like a simple ball bearing that's more precise than we could ever get. So the friction it removes, the change it makes to lubrication, that whole fabrication realm of low Earth orbit, I think is a tremendous. And so the fact that we commercialize that and can do it there, and then of course I love the fact that we're going to go back to the moon and Mars, and those things are now far more possible than they ever were. I'm very excited about that. Again, I think that's going to be a great future for the young generation. I hope I'm around to see some of that.
I hope I'm around to see some of that. That sounds exciting. You're the first one to bring it up. Low Earth orbit. Yeah.
I think it's happening now, so I think very soon we'll start to see that.
Well, this was great, Dave. Thank you so much for jumping on.
You're very welcome. I really enjoyed chatting with you.